3/4 of people in the UK older than 65 are living with at least one long-term health condition, with nearly 9 in 10 taking some kind of prescription medication.
Only 12% of Americans are considered metabolically healthy. In actual peak health, the percentage is probably like 5 or 6%.
Average life expectancy might be 80, but as health optimizers, we don't want to just live longer. We want to live better. Quality and quantity.
You never want to be just the average for your age group. You want to be like, 10 to 20 years better than your current chronological age.
Siim Land has one of the slowest speeds of aging in the world, and he's going to tell us how he did it.
Cardio alone appears to be better for mortality risk reduction than just strength. But if you combine them together, then that reduces the mortality risk and heart disease risk up to like 60%.
Welcome to the Health Optimization Podcast. I'm Tim Gray, the UK's leading biohacker. This podcast is all about gaining actionable advice from the world's top experts and sharing new breakthroughs in nature, biohacking, technology, and longevity research to help you live longer and happier. Life expectancy is on the rise, but according to the World Health Organization, all those extra years we're living are spent in poor health. So how do we make sure we stay at peak performance as we age? Physical exercise and a healthy diet are important, but they're not the only things to matter when it comes to longevity. Siim Land, the best-selling author, is a biohacker who writes about optimizing his health and human performance. He explores the hidden aspects of living longer and what it takes to be a healthy human in today's pretty unhealthy world. And today, Siim's going to share the diet and routines that lowered his age by 12 years.
Let's just dive straight in. What got you interested in the field of longevity at such a young age, considering you don't really have any health issues?
I got into like fitness and bodybuilding when I was like 18 years old, something like that. For the next few years until like 21 or something, I was mostly focused on just fitness and bodybuilding and that kind of thing, lifting weights. But then I wanted to like switch my focus more into like preventive health. So like my grandfather died to cancer when he was like 36 years old. So that made me just want to like take this health thing as a more like preventive strategy to not like unexpectedly die at a young age.
Awesome. I mean, there's always a motivation, an extra motivation, and I guess the granddad part is quite a big motivator in it. So how old are you chronologically?
Right now, I'm 29.
And biologically?
Yeah, well, that obviously depends on the test you're taking and what parameters are you looking at. So there's, by now there's dozens of different these epigenetic biological age tests out there. Some of them are more accurate, some of them less accurate. And, whether or not these tests actually tell you your actual biological age is still like up to debate. It's not like gold standard as of now. But yeah, I've done a few of these tests. At least I've done the same tests before. So like the first test I did in 2020, that was by my DNA age, that showed I was 16. And I did the same company's test in 2023. So 3 years later, and I was still 16. So it was
nice.
So it like hadn't increased. So that's a good sign, I guess. And some other tests I've done, some of them have said like 25. Some of them have said like I'm 85. But I talked with the company and they said like if you're like exercising a lot, then that can influence the results. And so like any kind of inflammation and a lot of oxidative stress, which you do experience if you're like working out hard, then that can change the results. And the same with like some of these infections and viral infections. What they say is that the biological age goes up during the infection and goes back down. So it's a very, let's say, fluid marker, and I wouldn't like put a lot of emphasis on these biological age tests. More important is like the overall blood work and the other biomarkers, like your body composition, your fitness status, your lipid panel, glucose levels, inflammation, those things, I think more practical, or at least we have a lot more data about what they mean.
Yeah, it's something I've always thought, because there's glycan age, which test I quite like, and it does seem to be varied, but it's a good benchmark, I guess, for yourself. And there's also obviously the telomeres, and I think there's another one out at the moment as well. But yeah, I always, like for instance, my telomeres showed that I was 32 and a half My glycan age showed that I was 21, which is, at the time, I think the youngest that they go for people over a certain age. So yeah, it's always a bit confusing. But when you look at, I guess, metabolic age versus obviously your telomeres, is two very different things. So what I've always done is just added the two together and divided by 2, which gives us it gives me a rough baseline of where I'm doing overall.
Yeah, like one of the best, or one of the best correlations with actual chronological age. One of the tests is a pheno age, and that is a collection of some like 9 biomarkers plus chronological age, or like albumin and some other markers I don't remember off the top of my head, but just like regular blood work, and calculates the biological age based on the pheno age, and that has like one of the highest correlation with actual like chronological age, where some other ones the correlation might not be that good.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's growing quickly, this field of, especially with longevity investments and everything that's going on at the moment. A lot of people are dropping a lot of money into these new technologies. It's great for the space because obviously it advances very quickly. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting to see how it's going. It's just like the microbiome over the last 10 years. I mean, the tests were super expensive back in 2013, like crazy expensive. Same with the DNA tests. And now, it's much more mainstream and much more commonplace. So interesting to see where these age tests are going. So do you see bodybuilding as a healthy sport, and are you still into it?
Well, I think professional bodybuilding for sure is like one of the unhealthiest sports in the world, both physically and mentally, probably. Because the professional bodybuilders who inject anabolics, that's certainly going to reduce your life expectancy quite a lot, even if you stop taking them, because even the short few years, whatever you've taken them, that's going to, on the other end, going to shorten the maximum lifespan probably. But natural bodybuilding is very kind of healthy and beneficial for slowing down the speed of aging, granted that you're not overdoing it, or granted that you're not yo-yo dieting that much. So muscle mass, it has a lot of longevity benefits. First of all, improves your insulin sensitivity, increases your metabolic rate, prevents frailty, protects against other ailments. So muscle B is very beneficial, and muscle mass E is associated with greater life expectancy and reduced mortality in the elderly people. So the older you get, then generally the trend is that your muscle mass and muscle strength decline by about 3 to 8% per decade. And you only have 40% of your body is generally muscle. Athletes maybe 45 or 50, but you don't have a ton of muscle. And if you're not doing anything to keep it, then it's going to go to low levels, which is clinically called sarcopenia. So that's defined as low muscle tone, low muscle mass, low muscle strength, and low physical performance. So it also includes things like your grip strength and gait speed, and how fast you can get off the chair. So if you're not able to walk very fast and you're not able to get off the chair independently, then that's just a sign that you have poor muscle function. And that just increases your risk of frailty, and is linked to heart disease and Alzheimer's and other things as well. But it's not that. So in the modern world and in the kind of biohacking or longevity space, you have to lift weights to maintain the muscle. The centenarians, probably they never lifted weights, but the reason they have higher amounts of muscle is because of their kind of physically active lifestyle and healthy other lifestyle choices, dietary choices and whatnot. So it's not that the people who live the longest lift the weights. It's more that the people who live the longest maintain the most amount of muscle tissue. And in a modern world, you have to kind of recreationally recreate that stimulus to maintain that muscle.
Yeah, I mean, the heaviest thing we have to lift these days is a pencil or a phone. Whereas back in the day, you had build houses and lift things and carry food and everything. And I think people say, well, we didn't need it back then, gyms back then, but we do now. There's a reason for that. So obviously when I met you, you were just 22, and we weren't far different in build, but now obviously, you're 29 and significantly bigger. How much of part of your life is lifting weights? Because obviously we see on your Instagram, you're doing dip bars with weights tied to your, not to your groin, but it looks like they're hanging from your groin. It's big fan of lifting. But I mean, how much do you do currently? And, what's your...
Right now, I've looked a lot in the research right now, like writing my next book about these topics, longevity, and you're just looking at all the data of, how much lifting is beneficial and what is the amount of muscle that is kind of healthy, because, like we said, excess muscle can be unhealthy at some point. So, first of all, what matters more than muscle mass is muscle strength. So head-to-head muscle strength is more important because it indicates more quality muscle tissue. Because you can have a lot of muscle mass even if you're obese or overweight, because you're carrying all the weight with you all the time. So you will have like big calves and legs. But muscle strength is a better sign of muscle quality and overall health. So like the muscle strength goes down faster. So it means that if you have higher muscle strength, then you are doing things and are healthy and you're more physically active generally. And my focus on training and resistance training, from the resistance training component, is like strength. So like I'm not trying to build muscle mass. It can happen as a byproduct, but I'm mostly focused on the muscle strength. And you don't need to do some sort of a powerlifting program, but any form of resistance training already can give the stimulus. So like anything from 30% of your 1 rep max all the way until 90 to 100%, as long as you reach near failure. So if you're lifting something that is 30%, so like lighter weights, you just need to do more reps and reach the failure and still get the muscle growth signal. But interesting, over the last year or something, there have been like a few meta-analyses on resistance training and mortality, and they find like more of this J-shaped association. So not lifting at all is associated with increased mortality. The sweet spot is somewhere between 60 to 90 minutes per week, and over 140 minutes per week is actually starts to be associated with increased risk. So that obviously is very like, okay, everyone tells to lift weights all the time. It kind of contradicts the narrative online. But mechanistically speaking, we don't know necessarily why that association occurs, but we do find that, excess training can, cause arterial stiffness. If you look at endurance athletes, they have higher coronary artery calcification because of the increased physical stress and inflammation. So like too much exercise obviously can be problematic. And right now what I'm doing is I'm doing around, 140, 150 minutes of resistance training. So that would be calisthenics or some barbell or dumbbells, kettlebells, all of those things per week. And the next part of my training routine is like cardiovascular exercise. Because if you look at then head-to-head comparing strength and cardiorespiratory fitness, then the cardiorespiratory fitness appears to give greater reductions in all-cause mortality risk than strength alone. So like in one of the UK Biohacks studies, they took 500,000 people, and they found that people with moderate amount of grip strength, which reflects your total body strength, the mortality risk reduction for that was like 21 to 35% reduction in all-cause mortality risk, having intermediate grip strength. 21 was the intermediate, and that already peaked out the maximum risk reduction benefits. Whereas with cardiorespiratory fitness, having elite or high cardiorespiratory fitness gave up to like 45%, somewhere between there, of risk reduction. So like cardio alone appears to be better for mortality risk reduction than just strength. But if you combine them together, having high grip strength and high cardiorespiratory fitness, then that reduces the mortality risk and heart disease risk up to like 60%. So having both is better than just strength or cardio. But head-to-head cardio does a little bit better.
It's super interesting when you think about it. When you say about the J shape, you say about muscle strength versus size. Well, obviously we need muscles for function, not for look. I mean, obviously it's an aesthetic thing where people like to look big and muscly, but ultimately muscles are there to provide strength. So therefore strength should be, I guess, the first thing that we look for. The other thing is, I think if you don't train enough, you don't build your muscles. If you overtrain, you don't build your muscles because you're too fatigued and your body's always in a repair state. It's like actually quite funny because Dr. Dom, who's one of the previous episodes, he used to train like 6 days a week. And when he's cut it back down to 4 or 3, his gains have increased significantly as a result of doing so. And I think that's just because his body has time to recover better.
Yeah.
And so I can understand the J shape of how it goes. Some lifting, increased life length or longevity. Too much, you're stressing your body too much.
Yeah.
And therefore it's never repairing, and therefore it's always in a fight or flight as a result. So I get it makes, from a layman perspective, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Of how these things go. So you have an elite level of VO2 max, right? Well, tell me why that's important. And for the people listening, what is VO2 max exactly?
Yeah, so VO2 max reflects your body's ability to utilize oxygen. So it's like maximum oxygen uptake during physical activity. And it's just the gold standard to reflect or measure your cardiorespiratory fitness. So how fit is your aerobic system, the cardio system. And the reason it's important, like I said, that cardiorespiratory fitness appears to give greater mortality risk reduction than strength. Obviously, you want to do both, but head-to-head, the higher VO2 max is more beneficial. And people who have the highest VO2 max, which is measured in milliliters per kilogram per minute, so 49 milliliters per kilogram per minute of VO2 max is associated with up to 300% lower risk of all-cause mortality than people of the lowest VO2 max, which is like 15 milliliters per kilogram.
So what is the VO2 max test?
Yeah, so it's like maximum oxygen uptake during physical activity. And you measure it at a sports lab, usually, where they put on this mask. You're running on this spirometry, and at the beginning you're walking, and then it increases in speed. Eventually you're like around 15 minutes, you're going to be at the maximum of your effort. And then you get the score of how much oxygen your body is utilizing during that effort at the highest intensity. And once you get that number, okay, what is your cardiorespiratory fitness? And there are, different age standards, but the goal, apparently, based on the research, is to get at least 49 milliliters per kilogram per minute for the lowest or the highest mortality risk reduction. So people who have a VO2 max of 15 milliliters per kilogram per minute, they're kind of physically less capable of doing everyday tasks, and they're like below the independence line. So they need help to do everyday tasks, like to carry the groceries or stuff like that. And like somewhere between 18 and 49 is then like your level of fitness. So my score was 66 the last time I did it, which is obviously well above the 49 limit, and it put me into the elite category of 18-year-olds. So obviously there's no data that having like a 60 VO2 max would be better than 50 or 70 for that matter. But it's just, I like to do it because it's kind of fun to try to challenge myself. And I do think that you're always like swimming upstream when it comes to these things. You never want to be just the average for your age group. Like you never want to be average or even above average for your age group with strength or cardiorespiratory fitness. You want to be, in the high or elite category, because with age, all those things start to decline anyway. So even if you are elite athlete in your 20s, by the time you're 60 or 70, let's say you still keep exercising, there's still some age-related entropy or decline that occurs with your VO2 max. So you want to be better, you want to be like, 10 to 20 years better than your current chronological age, if that makes sense.
The other thing is the average is the Homer Simpsons of the world.
Right.
So you don't really want to be compared to the Homer Simpsons.
Yeah.
So I guess at elite level, when you compare it to the average, is important, especially for a biohacker that puts half their life into their health and longevity.
And I think that the cardiorespiratory fitness is one of the most powerful things for heart health and most powerful things for, just longevity because when we're talking about longevity, we have to also be clear of, what's the goal or how do you achieve longevity. So like there's different these studies talking about like maximum lifespan of like in animals, whatever this supplement or this dietary intervention extended their maximum lifespan. But with humans, it's obviously more complicated. With humans, we have to, if we want to live to 100, we never know how good our genes are. Some people have better genes, others have worse. But to get to 100, we have to make sure that we don't die in our 60s first. And what's the number one leading cause of death in the world? It's heart disease. So like, most people will die to like some form of heart disease, usually around 60s or 70s. So how do you prevent that is the kind of the biggest mission for longevity. Like you first start with preventing heart disease as much as possible. Alzheimer's usually is diagnosed around early 80s. So first make sure that you don't get the heart disease, and then you're able to like get into the 80s and 90s and the 100s.
It's interesting about the heart disease one, because I read a book on nitric oxide recently, really detailed, very good book by Nathan Bryan, actually. And it was saying about how people's nitric oxide levels are so low, and therefore, their heart is under so much strain. And by optimizing nitric oxide levels, actually improves heart health significantly and exercise performance. And then I read a book on methylene blue, which goes into detail, which actually says the opposite. And it says, actually, you want to quash as much nitric oxide because it's an oxidant, pro-oxidant. And therefore, if your levels are high, you've got your body's dealing with something. Therefore, you want it to be lower. So you want to do things to bring your nitric oxide levels down into a healthy window. And so it's like I'm on two sides of the fence as to, obviously heart disease and nitric oxide deficiency, and then methylene blue saying you should bring it down. But the thing is, I find that when I'm actually when I take methylene blue, and I take 20 milligrams a day at the moment as a test, I feel fantastic for it. My exercise is better, my gym performance is better. So it's just really interesting how I'm wondering if I was one of the people that nitric oxide is actually, having higher levels, is as a result of something going on physiologically.
Yeah, for sure. Like with many of these things, there's negative side effects. So like angiogenesis, which is the process of growing new blood vessels, it can be very great for general health, but angiogenesis can also feed blood and or supply energy to cancer cells as well. So it's again very depends a lot on the dosage, and your body obviously functions best in like homeostasis and balance.
The Goldilocks is like Goldilocks dose.
Yeah,
I guess
it's almost everything has that, with the exception of even like biomarkers. Like too low of a certain biomarker generally is associated with some cancer or some other age-related disease, and too high can also be harmful. With the exception of a few, like CRP is generally like the lower the better. But things like, at least like if your blood sugar levels are like super low, then you probably have some sort of comorbidity that is associated with increased mortality.
So why is sprinting specifically a powerful way of slowing down aging of your physical fitness?
Yeah, so it obviously like taps into both cardiorespiratory fitness and to a certain extent some aspects of like strength training as well. So with age, proportionally, what goes down the most in terms of your muscle composition is the fast twitch muscle fibers, so type 2 muscle fibers. And those are the ones that you use when you're lifting something or when you're sprinting, jumping. So like that's why you don't see old people being very fast or jumping. So it's their bodies have lost the explosiveness, and they're less like agile. And if you're slow, then also you're less able to catch yourself when you're falling off the stairs, and that can lead to like problems with hip fractures and those kind of things. So sprinting is just one of the best ways to maintain the fast twitch muscle fibers and to maintain the speed and quickness. So young people or children, you can see they just run all the time. They don't need a lot of recovery even. Whereas old people, most people stop sprinting after high school. Like, unless they're like into fitness, they probably don't do a lot of sprinting in their everyday life. And what you don't use, you lose. So that's kind of the main principle of strength training and overall muscle function. And sprinting is just one way of doing that. You can also just train plyometrics, so just maximum jumps up and down or leaps forward. But like heavier resistance training also trains those fast twitch muscle fibers. So like squats and deadlifts.
It's really interesting because I love that saying. It was in my mind on one of the previous questions, actually. It's like, what you don't use, you lose. And it's the same, obviously, for brain health, like Jim Quick talks about it, how to exercise your brain. And the older you are, the more puzzles or crosswords you do, then the younger your brain stays. I think the other thing is, like, in terms of fitness and longevity, if you are 70 and you're sprinting every day and your body's used to it, you don't decline immediately overnight. So if you do this all the way from 30 all the way up to 80, you're going to be able to keep up, like, to some extent. Whereas if you stop, then you start losing it. And then if you have an exercise run from 40 until you're 80, it's not going to happen. So it's like, it's almost indicates to the body, you still need these functions, keep them up and divert energy to these areas of your body so that you can continue.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you are, so the biggest reason why these things decline happens because of not using those things. Like, there's many examples of 90-year-old world champion rowers who have, like, the VO2 max of someone who is 30 years younger. So there is some decline with age. So, like, VO2 max can decline about, up to 15% per decade if you're, like, completely sedentary. But if you are still exercising, then that is about, half that. So like 5 to 6% only. So you can easily maintain it by just staying active. And you're right, like, that it tells the body that you need those functions. Like, you need to stay young and you need to kind of stay, physically active.
I mean, the body is an amazing machine, really. And it's like, we adapt. For instance, if you supplement with testosterone, your natural levels of testosterone goes down, the feedback loop. And it's like, if your body is stressed, it's going to divert energy to the muscles. So let's say chronic stress, because you're running away from a threat. So it's diverted away from digestion to your muscles. And so the body knows how to utilize its energy wisely, very wisely. In fact, so wisely, this is why we have a lot of these metabolic diseases, because the body is diverting and trying to compensate for something going on, such as, like insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. The body's going, well, actually, how do I cope with this? And what are the byproducts? So I think it's really interesting the way that you explain it like that, because I like the thought in the simplistic term for the listener is like, the body diverts energy to where it's needed. And if you're running every day, or sprinting every day, or lifting every day, or exercising your brain every day, the body's going to divert energy to those functions because it thinks it's the most important thing it needs. So it's a really interesting mindset. So you're already an accomplished author. And when we met, I think you'd already written a few books. But how many books have you written today, and what are they?
I guess right now it's 8 that are currently sold and that are like solid books. I think 8 are from different topics. So my own books have been Metabolic, Authophagy, which talks about intermittent fasting mostly. Then Stronger by Stress, that talks about the idea behind stress adaptation. Then I co-authored multiple books with Dr. James Di Nicolantonio. First one was The Immunity Fix, then was The Mineral Fix. Then we published The Win, which talks about physical performance and athleticism. Then The Obesity Fix. Then Collagen Cure, that talks about collagen glycine. And the last one was The Blood Sugar Fix, which was about glucose management.
And they are massive books as well. I'm going to say, like, they are, like, for me, reference guides as well. I mean, I've got pretty much all of them on my shelf, which is pretty much all of my shelf. But like, for instance, Metabolic or Autophagy, I remember when you handed me a copy of that one, it's about this thick. And then there's a lot of really, it's packed with information. It's insane the amount of hours you must put into writing.
Well, I mean, right now is the biggest book of all time is being written right now for me.
Really?
So, like, I started writing it. I started writing it in September, which is going to be the Longevity Leap. So that pretty much the combination of all things related to longevity, like exercise, diet, supplements, different diseases, and those kind of things. And right now, I checked, like, currently it's been like 60% ready or something, maybe 70, and it was like 250,000 words already. But I'm gonna have to, like, obviously cut it down, because my plan was to really write a more comprehensive version first, even for my own self, to have, like, the reference guide, to just go through all the data and have the manual for myself, and then publish a more smaller, less complex version. Because one of the like biggest, if you look at our even with our books with Dr. James on Amazon, the only 1-star reviews are the ones that say the book is too difficult or too scientific, which is a bit of a compliment almost, but it's like the average person who doesn't have that much experience and knowledge about these topics, it can sometimes be a bit more confusing. So I'm trying to make this one the public version to make it more easier to digest as well, and less like different pathways and complexes and whatever.
Yeah, it's one of the things, my approach with biohacking, as I said yesterday at the talk, is that you guys are also detailed and talk in such a level of detail. And it's great for when you're an accomplished biohacker or someone that's really into health, but for the average human trying to get into it, it can be overwhelming. For instance, if I was to give my mum the book, she would be a bit overwhelmed. Whereas when I speak in more abstract terms and simplify, it works very well. So I see it as a kind of like, obviously I do content, for instance, why not to drink Coca-Cola or McDonald's? And I mean, for us, it's obvious. And for a lot of the population, but actually they're the widest reaching pieces of content. And people are like, wow, I can't believe I didn't know this. And then obviously they progress down the line until they end up reading a book on metabolic autophagy, which actually is one of your books. In fact, I remember at the Bulletproof conference, when we went back in 2019, I think it was, and you had just written Metabolic Autophagy, and we saw Dr. McCullough, and you ran up to him and handed him a copy of the book, and he said, anyone that's written a book on metabolic autophagy that's that big, I've got to interview. I never forget this moment. Obviously, metabolic autophagy gets into the science of metabolism, calorie restriction, and energy. Can you explain what autophagy is exactly and how it works?
Autophagy translates into self-eating, and it's an intracellular process of cleaning up the cells from different kind of debris. So old mitochondria, organelles, even like viruses, bacteria, everything like, just the junk material that accumulates in the cell with aging and the different kinds of disease states. So it's a very essential process. It does happen to a certain degree all the time. With age, your basal autophagy declines, which corresponds with the increase in junk material and mitochondrial dysfunction and those kind of things. So autophagy itself is also a hallmark of aging. So loss of autophagy is a new hallmark of aging, actually. I wrote the book in 2019, but around 2021 or something, autophagy itself became also one of the major hallmarks of aging. And it also connects with all the other hallmarks of aging, like the mitochondrial dysfunction. So the dysfunctional mitochondria, they spread inflammation and oxidative stress. Autophagy helps to clean them out and pretty much maintain better cellular function. Then there's, telomere shortening, intercellular communication, chronic inflammation, stem cell dysfunction or stem cell exhaustion, loss of proteostasis. They're all affected by autophagy in some shape or form. So it's a very, important process. And I guess the problem is that in the modern world, there are a lot of things that inhibit autophagy, or just we are under so much more additional inflammation and stress that we need like more of that to clean up the damage. But with autophagy is another one of those, like too much can also be bad, because it's considered some sort of like this magical process that just makes you live forever. But the truth is that a lot of the cancer cells also hijack autophagy for their own survival. So autophagy isn't like an entity; it's more of like we don't even know where does it come from, or we just know that at some point there's the formation of these autophagosomes and a lysosome that then engulfs the whatever thing you're trying to eat. So we don't even know how it exactly works. It's more of like some sort of cellular consciousness that decides, okay, we need to eliminate this thing. And then it creates these autophagosomes. So it's more of like if the cancer cell is energy deprived or it's under some sort of physiological stressor like calorie restriction or fasting, then at some point it can adapt to that stressor and can also just kind of hijack some of the energy that gets created during autophagy. So there's some cases where you want to inhibit autophagy. There's other cases where you want to increase it. But with a healthy lifestyle, you generally achieve the balance. So like things like exercise and coffee and teas and polyphenols, different kinds of these hormetic stressors, they support the process of autophagy.
So what can people do today other than exercising and having polyphenols, what else can they do, or what could they supplement with that would help with autophagy? Because obviously prevention is ideal, but a lot of people, especially, listeners, will want to say, well, what supplement can I take? Because a lot of us do, obviously.
Yeah, the most powerful and the fastest way to like increase autophagy is probably high intensity exercise. So just even like 30 minutes of HIIT exercise will upregulate autophagy and keep it elevated for a lot longer. Whereas a few years ago, people just thought that you need to fast 3 days to get the first signs of autophagy. But yeah, you can do it very fast, and you don't need to do this very extreme long fasts to reap those benefits. Maybe some aspects of time restricted eating can be beneficial. So like 16 and 8, you skip breakfast and have lunch and dinner, for example. Like the fast is still like relatively short, and we don't necessarily know how much autophagy you need, but at least, there's other benefits as well to this way of eating. Like you can achieve a calorie deficit, which also increases autophagy and has other health benefits. So it's, like another strategy they can use to create this like lifestyle. Coffee does it, which is good. Green tea, different herbal teas, most of these herbs and polyphenols have that effect. Sauna does it. Cold, I haven't seen that cold directly that activates autophagy, but there's some signs that rewarming after cold exposure increases the expression of autophagosomes. So it's like if you do the cold and ice bath and the sauna, then that can be maybe like one of the hacks to combine. And from a supplement side, then berberine is a very potent autophagy activator. These medicinal mushrooms, chaga, lion's mane, melatonin probably as well, because melatonin in your sleep regulates autophagy and other of these pathways, longevity pathways. Yeah, there's like spermidine as well. They said to regulate or work through autophagy. The problem is that in human clinical trials, even like very large doses of spermidine, like 15 milligrams a day, hasn't been seen to raise plasma spermidine levels. So we don't know like if the spermidine supplement works. Like dietary spermidine is definitely associated with reduced mortality and reduced heart disease. So like mushrooms, wheat germ, soybean, cheese, and algae as well.
Interesting. So what terrifying statistic do you have around any of this?
Yeah, I think one very eye-opening and kind of scary statistic is from the NHANES data, and based on their statistics, then only 12% of Americans are considered metabolically healthy. So that means having normal blood sugar, normal waist circumference, and normal blood pressure and normal lipids. So very minority of people are actually what is considered metabolically healthy. Of course, there's different, maybe criteria people have, but at least based on their criteria, they find that 12% of Americans, which is, 330 million people, so 12% of that is only like 35 million people.
It's pretty shocking, actually. Even regardless of what the measures are that they're doing, 12% is pretty.
And I would imagine that their criteria are a bit more liberal, kind of. So like they have probably lower standards compared to like some other biohackers. So like in actual peak health, the percentage is probably like 5 or 6%.
I can imagine the pharmaceutical industry are very happy with that. What's the best fasting or caloric restriction protocol for longevity?
Yeah, so the idea that calorie restriction or intermittent fasting are going to have longevity benefits in humans is not like fully proven. So it's very hard to do lifelong studies in humans. We do know that in almost all of the animal species, calorie restriction does extend their lifespan. With intermittent fasting, most of the longevity benefits from intermittent fasting studies on animals also come from calorie restriction. There might be like 1/3 of the benefits might come from the time restricted effect, but most of the benefits still come from calorie restriction. And in humans, there are some of these, the National Institute of Aging has funded these calorie studies over the last few decades. And what they find is that, calorie restriction of 25% for up to 2 years generally does like improve cardiometabolic risk factors, makes them lose weight, and improves, just general blood markers related to health. The problem with those studies is that it's obviously not like a randomized, it's not completely controlled. You can't control the calorie intake in free living humans, but they also end up eating actually around only 12% of the calorie restriction. So, they adhere only to, or they're able to adhere to only 50% of what they were prescribed to. So maybe the benefits would be even greater if they actually ate 25% less, but we don't know. But regardless, what you do find is that people eat less, they lose weight, their blood markers generally become better. And I think that's the most important takeaway as well from the calorie restriction studies, is that the biggest thing is to not get overweight and obese because obesity cuts your life expectancy by 10 to 20 years. Diabetes does it as well, 10 to 20 years. So if you avoid obesity and these metabolic disorders, metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, then you're already preventing your life from being much shorter.
So when you say calorie restriction, actually really interesting, because for a beginner, or I guess someone that doesn't know it into the level of detail that we would or you would, restricting too many calories means under eating, which means that your body doesn't repair, right? So you can go the other way. Again, there's a sweet spot. And I guess that's why, for instance, when I thought fasting, I read a certain book on fasting. It wasn't yours, by the way. And how eating less is better. And being an ectomorph myself, which is super skinny, I got down to 58 kilos, 59 kilos, which, there's a picture I have on Instagram of it. My shoulders are just like wafer thin. It was insane. And I was actually eating about 1,200 calories a day just because I thought fasting was great. But the thing is I think when you're an obese person or a large person and you can eat a packet of nuts a day and still put on weight, versus a skinny dude that can eat 3,500 calories a day and work out hard and still not put on much extra volume. I think it's individualized approach, isn't it? So restrict calories as in don't get fat and have a good percentage of body weight being fat, not over, but also at the same time don't be under. So when you hear calorie restriction, don't just cut out all your calories and eat everything like lettuce leaves all day.
So there are people who try to do that, like the Calorie Restriction Society, that they believe in this, that eating as little is going to make them live longer. So we don't have like obviously long-term data about those, but the risk with calorie restriction is, you can become too frail and lose muscle, which is, we talked earlier, is very important for longevity. The key component from the animal studies is even that malnutrition is also very important. So if you're calorie restricted and malnourished, then those animals don't live longer. So the key is doing calorie restriction without malnutrition. So getting all the essential vitamins and minerals, and I would put into that getting adequate protein as well, because protein is an essential macronutrient and you need it to maintain muscle. So if you are practicing some form of calorie restriction, then you can minimize the risk of frailty and the risk of becoming too skinny as well by eating enough protein and also doing resistance training at the same time. Because if you're calorie restricted and you're not lifting weights, then your body will lose the muscle much faster. Whereas if you signal the body that, hey, you need to maintain the muscle, then you will maintain it. And how much weight should you lose? How much is considered being too overweight? So the mortality data, based on the BMI at least, is so anything between 18 to 24 is associated with lower mortality. So if you're under 18, so that means you're probably malnourished and too skinny. And if your BMI is over, so let's say if you're someone who has muscle, your BMI might be 26, 27. So that's still normal, or that's still healthy because the BMI is higher because of your muscle tissue. So that's not like a red flag at that point. But if your BMI is like 30, I lift weights, I have muscle, that's why my BMI is 30. Well, to get a BMI of 30, you still probably have to have too much body fat as well. So in that scenario, you still need to lose a few pounds to lose the extra body fat. And with the body fat percentages, there's also, with men at least, the lower the body fat, then the lower the risk, kind of. Obviously, maybe not below the essential body fat stores, but with men tend to, based on the data, they need to be more careful with their weight. Whereas women, like being overweight for women matters much less for longevity. Like overweight women can live significantly longer than normal weight men because of the hormones and the estrogen, for example.
It's funny you say about that, but if you don't have enough nutrition or nutrients, like obviously we need certain range of nutrients from our food. And if we're under eating those because we're restricting too many calories, then our body's going to break down. And I think if you don't have enough protein, then your body starts eating itself essentially, doesn't it? And it starts breaking down that muscle tissue to keep your body alive. And so it starts wasting. And it's the same, I think, with, some conditions that females have, for instance, osteoporosis. It's like actually the minerals are coming out of the bones into the body to keep the body going because there's an imbalance. Whereas when they're actually mineralized properly in their diet and have some of the right components such as sunlight, vitamin D and vitamin K, then actually osteoporosis or osteopenia starts reversing because the body starts eating itself. So it's just interesting. And then you say on the female side of things, I've known a few female bodybuilders and got their body fat very low, and they lose their period, and their cycle goes, they start breaking down, their hormones go completely out of whack just because they need more body fat for their hormones, obviously. So it's really interesting. And I heard one point years ago now that apparently the curvier the woman, the higher the DHA stores, and therefore the smarter the baby. And so it's just really interesting how fundamental fat is to women compared to men, I guess, that need to be more the gatherers and not the nurturers.
Yeah, for men, if you're overweight, if you have some aspects of diabetes and those kind of things, then you're gonna go much faster than the women. Like if a woman is slightly overweight, then it doesn't matter to them that much. And with even the metabolic health side, women appear to, women live up to 10 years longer on average than men. So,
Interesting. So what specific foods makes us live longer and build muscle?
Well, can you have both at the same time? That's obviously a very controversial topic, or many people have different opinions. I'm much of a believer that the food choices don't matter nearly as much as things like staying in optimal body composition and exercising and at least getting the essential vitamins and minerals. So there's no 100% perfect diet. All diets have some trade-offs. All diets, optimize different aspects of health. Some diets are better for muscle growth. Other diets are better for reducing heart disease risk. So it comes down to understanding some of the fundamentals and then, structuring your diet based on what is most sustainable to you. So, some people aren't able to maintain their weight by eating carbohydrates. Other people are fine eating a lot of carbohydrates and staying lean and healthy. So it comes down to, what are your biomarkers and what your blood markers, what your body composition, and how you feel and how do you respond to these different kinds of foods. But some of the most fundamentals are, again, normal calorie intake, don't become overweight and obese, get adequate amount of protein, which is, the most maximum benefits for muscle growth at least come from 1.6 grams per kilogram of weight up to 2.2 grams per kilogram of weight per day in protein. So if I weigh 79 kilograms, then my recommended protein intake for maximum muscle growth would be something like 135 up to 150 grams of protein per day. So if I eat more, I'm not going to gain inherently additional benefits for muscle growth. If I eat less, so if I eat only 100 grams of protein, then I'm probably able to maintain it easily. I might even build it slightly if my training is properly structured, but I'm not going to maximize the muscle growth gains. So anywhere around 1.4 to 1.6 is probably optimal from a longevity perspective, because, if you have higher protein intake, then generally, at least in human research, people who eat more protein have lower body weight, they're healthier, or they have less body fat, and that they tend to have more muscle as well. Especially for the elderly, you would want to have the higher end of the protein. If you're younger, then you don't need the 1.6 grams. You can easily get around with 1 gram per kilogram, but you're not expected to maximize the muscle potential. So it again depends on your goals and age. So I am trying to get at least 130 grams of protein for myself every day. And that's adequate, sufficiently adequate, because the biggest signal still comes from the training. So you could be on a moderate protein diet and have a very good training routine and still build more muscle than someone who has a higher protein intake but a lousier workout routine. So it's the training is the biggest stimulus, and then sufficient amount of protein should be there. When it comes to carbohydrates, so at least like carbohydrates are obviously like different groups of carbohydrates. There's fiber, there's fruit, there's more complex carbs and starchy carbs, and then there's sugar and the refined carbs. So like fiber is associated generally with better health. So people who eat more fiber have lower blood pressure, lower body weight. Even the elderly people who eat more fiber have higher grip strength. So I think it's more of an indicator of better diet quality. There are some mechanistic benefits as well, like it can bind to fat in the blood and reduce the gastric emptying and those kind of things. It's not considered like an essential nutrient, but I think just the sheer amount of human data we have about people eating fiber, then you can't say that fiber is bad. Like there's no data that would indicate it from a longevity perspective. Like obviously there's some people who have autoimmune conditions and whatnot, but at least based on the data, people who eat more fiber generally have better health outcomes. Then fruit is kind of the similar. It's associated with lower mortality, lower diabetes, although some people say that fruit is high in sugar and it's going to be as bad as eating candy. But if you look at the actual human outcome studies, then people who eat more fruit have less diabetes and they live longer. So it's again like, okay, are we looking at this specific mechanism, or we actually look at the actual outcome data? So when you're trying to live long and stay healthy for as long as possible, then which one are you going to rely on, or which one are you going to trust more, like some sort of a cell or mechanism, or the actual, okay, what is these people who have lived to 100, what do they do? So like from other carbs, whole food complex carbs, they're also associated with like better health generally. And refined carbs, at least processed refined carbs, are associated with worse health and increased mortality. So like those are like these pastries and chips and those kind of things. Ultra processed food in general is, I think most people can agree that it's not like health inducive or beneficial for health. It's more of, you can get away with some small amounts, but the more ultra processed food you eat, the higher the risk generally is, even independent of calorie intake. And lastly, fats. That's also like obviously different opinions about this topic. I'm personally more of like a Mediterranean style nowadays, like olive oil and fish are my main fat sources. I don't have a high fat diet because I'm very physically active, and the carbs are actually more beneficial from the like a sports performance side. Like carbs are superior for athleticism, and because all the elite level athletes, they eat carbs a lot. And if you are physically active, then you don't have anything to worry about blood sugar and insulin resistance. My hemoglobin A1C, the test I did here, was 5%, which is very good. Although I eat like plenty of carbs almost every day. And yeah, like my fat intake mostly comes from whole foods. I think it's not wise to add a lot of extra fats because it's just going to increase the calorie content of the meal. So I'm getting my fats from fish, maybe nuts and seeds, and some meats and eggs and those kind of things. And like olive oil is the only like added fat I use because it also has like a lot of evidence of benefits from like a longevity side.
So I've seen you talk about 5 diet hacks for weight loss. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah. So you don't need to count calories to lose weight. Although if you were to literally weigh all the food and count all the calories and be sure that you're in a calorie deficit, you would probably lose weight. It's like in very rare cases, it might not happen, but most people don't have the time or the willpower to count their calories. So it comes down to making dietary and lifestyle choices that make weight loss automatic and less effortful. So how do you achieve that? Number one is to focus on protein and fiber. So protein is very satiating, and it also has the highest thermic effect of food, which means that your body spends the most amount of calories digesting protein. So 30% of the protein or the calories from protein get wasted on digesting that protein. Whereas with carbs, it's only like 7%, and fats is only 2 to 3%. So like your body is actually, it's the hardest to store protein as body fat, so to say. So if you eat a lot of protein, all the studies also find that higher protein diets do better for weight loss because people undereat at some point. It's so filling. And fiber, the same with fiber. People who eat more fiber, it's very low calories and very filling. So they just end up eating less in total. So I think just structuring your meals around protein and fiber and then adding like, 1/3 of it, maybe some carbs or something else. That's I think like a plate for general, most people can follow. The second hack is to exercise before eating, or at least do some form of movement. So like instead of literally after waking up, instead of literally eating, you can like, still move around a little bit, or in between work, you have lunch, you're sitting at a computer, you go for lunch, and then you go back, sit at a computer. So you never really move. So adding some form of physical, let's say, movement before eating and even afterwards, it can just help you to increase your energy expenditure. So you will be in a greater demand for calories that would help you to lose weight. And exercise also improves your insulin sensitivity quite a lot. So that means that your body clears the blood sugar much faster, and the blood sugar will stay lower as opposed to eating when you're sedentary. And this applies especially to after eating. So even as little as 10 to 15 minutes of walking after eating, it can lower the blood sugar levels quite rapidly.
Is it? So when you think about the standard American diet in front of Netflix from a microwave and sitting around all evening before, during and after eating, is basically the opposite of everything that you're saying to do. Processed food, microwave, sedentary, not moving before or after dinner.
Yeah.
And so no wonder it's a shitstorm.
Yeah, it's literally like the perfect machine for making people overweight and obese.
And unhealthy.
And the next point is, kind of portion control. So in Japanese, there's this phrase, harahachibu, which means like you stop eating at 80% full. Because if you're 80% full right now, then in around 20, 30 minutes, you're going to be 100% full because, it doesn't work immediately. You need some time to digest and get the signal into your brain that you're kind of full. So if you eat to 100% full, then you're going to be stuffed later. So it's better to stop before you're completely full so that you would reach full satiety kind of later. It might require some like willpower to put the fork down, but at some point you have to do it. So, yeah. And lastly is also being like more mindful with the food intake, because if you're like watching Netflix and scrolling the phone at the same time, then you're not like paying that much attention to what you're eating, and you might still be hungry afterwards. So it comes down to like portion control and managing the energy intake and make it effortless.
Siim, thanks very much for joining me on the podcast today while we're in India. And it's been good fun recording for you, being on my podcast as opposed to the other way around for once. So it's been good.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to have you.
Thanks, man.
A massive thank you to my guest and friend Siim Land. To learn more about Siim, you can find him on Instagram and YouTube, or check out his website siimland.co. You've been listening to the Health Optimization Podcast, and I'm Tim Gray. If you're watching on YouTube, comment and leave the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to see more. You can also find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the usual places you like to listen. Check out the show description for extra information and the links. See you next time, and remember, let's spread the health.